Mr. President.
The senator from South Dakota.
I ask unanimous consent that quorum call be dispensed with and that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business for as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. President, late last week the American taxpayer got some really good news. And that was because the administration announced that they were not going to move forward with implementing the Class Act. And it was a stunning end for something that many of us have believed is a fiscal time bomb for our country. They acknowledge that it is simply not workable. In fact, the HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius said, despite our best analytical efforts, I do not see a viable path forward for class implementation at this time, end quote. The Washington Post went on to say the Obama administration cut a major planned benefit from the 2010 health care law on Friday, announcing that a program to offer Americans insurance for long-term care was simply unworkable. The Hill reported that HHS officials acknowledged the Class Act fell apart simply because it was too flawed to salvage. And Politico said a stunning end to a financially troubled long-term care insurance program and a major setback to the health care reform law. Even the New York Times had editorialized it was too costly and would not work. And so, Mr. President, this is good news for the American taxpayer because this is something that many of us argued the conclusion that inevitably people would come to when this was discussed and debated as part of the health care reform bill over a year ago. In fact, on December 4th of 2009, I offered an amendment to repeal the Class Act. It was then offered as one of the pay-fors for the President's health care reform bill. It was at that time said to generate somewhere on the order of $70 billion in additional revenue that could be used to pay for the health care bill. More recent estimates of that number are somewhere in the order of $86 billion that would be generated in the first 10 years. One of the reasons for that was, of course, that people would begin to start paying premiums even though they wouldn't start demanding benefits until later. And even at the time, there was a tremendous concern that this would run up deficits, blow up deficits in the out years. When you got outside of that 10-year window, after people were through paying their premiums in, started demanding benefits, that this thing would get into a sort of a downward death spiral and would never pay for itself. And so that was a conclusion that many people were drawing already at that time, but there was such a rush to pass health care reform through here and to come up with ways to pay for it that this program, the ill-fated program, was included. It was interesting because that amendment that I offered back in December of 2009 actually had pretty broad bipartisan support. It had, at that time, every Republican voting for the amendment and 12 Democrats as well. So we had a majority of United States senators, 51 United States senators said in December of 2009 that we ought to repeal the Class Act from the underlying health care bill simply because it isn't workable. And it was going to run up deficits in the out years. Everybody knew it. And, but instead, we proceeded and plowed forward, and the health care bill was going to be passed, irrespective of the concerns that have been raised by many of us, but more importantly by people who really study these things, the experts, people at the Congressional Budget Office, the actuary at the Health and Human Services Department. There were lots of warnings going forward about this program and what a bad idea it really was. And so it's time that we be honest with the American people about this particular budget gimmick. And I can't help but thinking if we had come to this conclusion a long time ago, we would have saved some money that's been used to look at whether or not this can be implemented, whether it could actually work. The inevitable conclusion, of course, was that it would not. But I just want to read for my colleagues something that was stated by the actuary at the Health and Human Services way back in 2009. In fact, this goes back to July of 2009, well before the final vote occurred on the health care reform bill, and particularly the vote on the amendment that would have stripped this provision out of the health care reform bill. The actuary at the Health and Human Services Department, Mr. Richard Foster, said, "I'm sorry to report that I remain very doubtful that this proposal is sustainable at the specified premium and benefit amounts." He went on to say, 36 years of actuarial experience lead me to believe that this program would collapse in short order and require significant federal subsidies to continue." End quote. That was from the actuary at the Health and Human Services Department. He went on later that year, and this is in the August-September time frame, to say, "As you know, I continue to be convinced that the class proposal is not actuarially sound." I believe that, Mr. President, these are statements by somebody who had looked closely at this program and come to the right conclusion way back then that it just flat wasn't going to work. And yet, because of the mad rush to pass health care reform and to argue to the American people that somehow it was going to be paid for, this particular program was included. And it clearly was a mistake, a colossal mistake, and one, fortunately, it looks like at least now the administration has decided that they've concluded the same thing. And hopefully we can get this thing killed once and for all, and so that it doesn't become a drain on our children and grandchildren, which it of course would when the bills started to pile up in those out years and the deficit started to mount. You think about the fact that every American today owns about $48,000 of the federal debt. I mean, the federal debt is, for most Americans, it's like having a second mortgage, or perhaps, for that matter, a first mortgage on their homes. They have an enormous amount of debt that they're responsible for. And instead of looking at ways to reduce that debt, reduce the size of government, get spending under control, Washington, D.C. continues to look for ways to expand government and to add to the amount of debt that we're passing on to our children and grandchildren. So last week, when the announcement was made by the administration that this program is simply not workable and they're not going to implement it, it was a huge victory for the American taxpayer and a huge victory for our children and grandchildren, future generations of Americans who would end up having to pay for this thing. And if you think about the fact that we already have somewhere along the lines of $60 trillion in unfunded liabilities in other of our entitlement programs, piling yet another one on seems to me to be digging the hole ever deeper than it already is. And one thing that when you're in a deep hole you don't want to do is keep digging. And what this plan, the class plan, would have done is would have kept digging that hole even deeper for our children and grandchildren. Mr. President, interestingly enough, this was the analysis that was done by Health and Human Services when they came to the conclusion that it shouldn't be implemented. Now, as you can see, this is a volume that is several inches thick. So obviously they looked very carefully at this. Unfortunately, came to that conclusion 19 months later than they should have. But this is what they came up with in terms of concluding that the class program would not work. So, having done that analysis, one would think that the next logical conclusion would be, let's repeal this piece of legislation. Let's get this off the books. And yet the administration is still talking about, still somehow wedded to the idea that somehow this might work, and so they are saying that they don't want to see it repealed. Well, you heard Senator McCain, my colleague from Arizona, down here earlier today talking about this program and this report, and he is a co-sponsor, as I am, of a piece of legislation that we put forward to repeal the Class Act, and we'll work as quickly as we can to put together legislation now that we have this report back from HHS that will actually move forward with intentions to repeal this. But it strikes me, at least, that that's something that most of my colleagues, given what we know now, should be willing to support. And especially given the fact that there were 12 Democrats who voted with the Republicans back in December of 2009 to constitute a majority here in the United States Senate. 51 United States senators voted to repeal the Class Act from the health care bill back in December of 2009 before all of this analysis came out. So now that we have this analysis in front of us, it seems to me at least that the logical thing that we should do is to move forward with repealing this piece of legislation. Now, it's interesting, when we were debating this in the Senate back in December of 2009, many of my colleagues in the Senate said things about the Class Act that were very supportive, that actually somehow, I guess, believed that this was going to work. And I will not mention names to protect the guilty, but they called it a breakthrough. Some referred to it as a win-win. Others referred to it as critical. One of my colleagues said, so we get a lot of bangs for the buck, as one might say, with the Class Act that we have in this bill. Another of my colleagues said this is one of these critical pieces of the bill is the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Act, or the CLASS Act. Another one said the CLASS plan is a win-win. It went so far as to suggest that certain colleagues on our side of the aisle who have argued that the CLASS plan would lead to a financially unstable entitlement program that would rapidly increase the federal deficit. He went on to say that is simply not accurate. So there are many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Mr. President, who at the time believed wrongly that this was going to work. I hope now that we have this voluminous copy of analysis done by the Department of Health and Human Services that they will join with us in repealing this really bad piece of legislation, get it off the books once and for all. Mr. President, we have 32 co-sponsors on a bill that would do that. I hope that we, at the very first opportunity, and perhaps that will be even sometime this week, if in the legislation that we're considering now, could have an amendment that would repeal the CLASS Act so that we can put this thing and this issue once to bed once and for all for the American people. It seems to me, at least, with the kinds of year-over-year deficits that we're running, $1.3 trillion, $1.4 trillion deficits, the very least that we can do is take something we know is not going to work and focus on those things that actually will work. We ought to be talking right now about things that will reduce government spending, make the federal government smaller, expand our private economy where the jobs are created, and look at what we can be doing to create jobs. And I'm not suggesting for a minute, Mr. President, that the issue of long-term care is not an important one. It is. There are right ways and wrong ways to deal with that. And the CLASS Act represented the very worst way to deal with that, and that is to come up with a program that has been described as a downward death spiral and actually add to the debt that we're going to pass on to our children and grandchildren, knowing full well that this program would not pay for itself. It is a farce. It was never going to reduce the deficit. We now have that demonstrated in this analysis that's been done. And so I would hope that my colleagues here in the Senate on both sides of the aisle will come together and recognize that and repeal once and for all this very bad piece of legislation. It was good news when the administration recognized they couldn't implement it. It was not workable. It would be even better news for the American taxpayer and for future generations of Americans if the United States Congress would repeal this legislation and do it soon. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. The Senator from Tennessee. Oh, I'm sorry, the Senator from Oklahoma.
No. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at the conclusion of the remarks of the Senator from Tennessee that I be recognized as if in morning business. And what I'm going to be doing is trying to clear up some of the misunderstanding about the troops that have gone into Uganda and other areas on the LRA, Lord's Resistance Army.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Tennessee.
I thank the President. Mr. President, last month several Republican senators came to the floor and offered legislation to fix No Child Left Behind, the legislation that was passed nearly 10 years ago to try to address our nation's 100,000 public schools. In that legislation, we sought to fix problems with the legislation, not just to create another big reauthorization bill. And the ideas that we had weren't all our ideas. They included many ideas from President Obama, his excellent education secretary, Secretary Duncan, and as well as Democratic and Republican members of Congress. They included having a more realistic goal for No Child Left Behind. The original goal set in 2001 would, according to Secretary Duncan, create an unworkable situation where 80,000 of 100,000 public schools might be identified as failing within the next few years. A second goal of our legislation was to move decisions about deciding whether schools and teachers were succeeding or failing out of Washington, D.C. back to state and local governments. A lot has happened in the last 10 years in the states, really the last 20 or 25, but especially in the last 10. We have better reporting requirements from No Child Left Behind. We have new state common standards, higher academic standards. We have new state tests that have been created, not here, but by the states to do that. And now states are working together to create what they call accountability systems. So there's a much better chance that states and local school districts can create an environment where students learn what they need to know and be able to do. Our legislation encourages states to create what I think is the holy grail of public education, and that is principal-teacher evaluation related to student achievement. I know from experience that's hard to do. In 1983 and 84, when I was governor of Tennessee, we became the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well. It took us a year and a half and a huge battle with the National Education Association in order to put it in place, but 10,000 teachers became master teachers. It was a good first step. Tennessee is already doing it again. Here's my local newspaper this morning, evaluations of teachers contentious. There's nothing more contentious, and the last thing we need is Washington sticking its nose into that, other than to create an environment where state and local governments can use federal money to pay for their own programs, their own state and local programs. We propose consolidating programs, making it easier for school districts to transfer federal money and expand choices and expand charter schools. Now today, the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Education Committee, the HELP Committee we call it, have introduced another draft piece of legislation to fix No Child Left Behind. I intend to vote to move this bill out of committee, although it is not yet the kind of legislation that I would be willing to vote to send to the President. But it's a good place to start. There's a good deal of agreement in terms of what we want to do in our legislation from a few weeks ago and the Harkin-Enzi bill. Among the agreements are moving decisions about whether schools are succeeding or failing out of Washington. Another is to encourage principal-teacher evaluation without mandating, defining, and regulating it from Washington, D.C. Another good provision is to encourage but not define and mandate and regulate using measures of growth of students, not just whether they achieve something, but whether they are making rapid progress toward a goal, making that in terms of whether schools and students are succeeding. There are many provisions in the Harkin-Enzi bill that have been suggested both by Democrats or Republicans. But there are a number of provisions, not in our legislation, and that I don't support. And I'm going to seek to amend them. I've indicated to the senators that I intend to offer 7 amendments, which, in my view, would take out of the legislation provisions that tend to create a national school board. One is the so-called achievement gap. One is the so-called highly qualified teachers provision. These are all provisions that substitute the judgment of people in Washington for that of mayors, local school boards, governors, and legislators. So I don't think we need a national school board, and neither do most Americans. Some will say, well, then why would you support a bill that you don't entirely agree with? The reason is that we have a process here in Congress. This isn't like the health care bill a few years ago when we had 40 Republican senators and Speaker Pelosi was in charge of the House of Representatives. We have 47 Republican senators. We have a Republican House of Representatives. And we need to get started fixing this problem. We need to do something a little different around here. We need to, instead of just beating our chests, we need to find a way to put our heads together, head toward a reasonable result, come up with a solution, and offer it to the President and to the American people. There's no reason in the world why we can't, given the amount of agreement we already have, send to the President by Christmas legislation fixing No Child Left Behind. And we should do it, because if we don't, Congress in action will mean that we will transform the United States Education Secretary into a waiver-granting czar for 80,000 schools in this country who, according to this law, will be identified as failing. Well, if we were to have an education czar, or if we were to have a chairman of a national education school board, Secretary Arne Duncan would be a good one. But I don't think we want one in the United States of America, and so I think we should act before Christmas in order to avoid creating a waiver-granting education czar, and we should act before Christmas in a way that does not create a national school board. Mr. President, there's one other suggestion I would make to the authors of this bill. In our earlier meetings with the President, Congressman George Miller of California, who was a key leader in developing No Child Left Behind, said this bill to fix No Child Left Behind ought to be a lean bill. I agree with Congressman Miller. The legislation that we Republicans introduced a few weeks ago totaled 221 pages in its 5 bills. The comparable section of the Harkin-Enzi draft are 517 pages. I would urge that we follow Congressman Miller's advice in the final result and be much more succinct than that. So, Mr. President, despite these concerns, I will vote on Wednesday or Thursday, whenever we finish, in favor of bringing this base bill out of the Help Committee and onto the Senate floor, where we can have full amendments. I'm going to do my best to improve it in committee and on the Senate floor to make it more like the legislation we introduced a month ago. I'm going to continue to do that in the conference that we have with the House of Representatives. I think it's time that we recognize that the American people expect us to step up to major issues, put our best ideas together, and come up with a result. We're partway there. This is a good place to start. I thank Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi for the work they've done, as well as Representative Klein and Representative Miller, and I thank the President and Secretary Duncan for their attitude. I look forward to working with them to come to a conclusion. One last thing. We talk a lot about jobs around here. Every American knows that better schools mean better jobs. And they all know that schools are a lot like jobs. We can't create them from Washington, but we can create an environment in which people in their own communities and families and states can create better schools and better jobs. This is a good place to start. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter of support which also outlines my objections to the legislation that was introduced today, and a copy of an article from the Maryville-Alcoa Daily Times today which reminds us of how difficult it is to evaluate teachers fairly and how wise we would be if we satisfied ourselves with creating an environment in which that could happen, but did not mandate it, define it, and regulate it from Washington, D.C. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Without objection, the materials will be placed in the record.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I had a few minutes ago asked unanimous consent that I be recognized following the remarks by the Senator from Tennessee, and it's been called to my attention that the Senator from Virginia would like to have the floor at this time, so I would amend my unanimous consent request and request that I be recognized at the conclusion of the remarks of the Senator from Virginia.
Without objection, the Senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Oklahoma for having given me the courtesy of speaking, and thank him again for the work that he has done on the Foreign Relations Committee Subcommittee on East Asian Affairs, where he is the ranking Republican, and the other work that he's done on Armed Services Committee. Mr. President, today I rise to speak about the National Criminal Justice Commission legislation, which I introduced more than 2 years ago, in which the leader and the managers of this bill are now going to call as an amendment on the pending legislation. And I want to first of all thank the leader and the managers of the bill for calling up this legislation, and also to thank my principal Republican co-sponsor, Senator Lindsey Graham, for all the work that he has done on the bill. Mr. President, there's good national commissions and bad national commissions and redundant national commissions, and sometimes they're national commissions which are not only needed but vital to the resolution of issues that face us. I'm thinking as I speak of the first of the Commission on Wartime Contracting, which Senator Claire McCaskill and I introduced 4 years ago, and which resulted in a finding of between $30 billion in fraud, waste, and abuse in contracts that had gone to Iraq and Afghanistan, and also provided a model for the way that we should be approaching such contracts in the future. And I would put this particular National Commission in that category. It was put together after much thought and many hearings. It is paid for. It is sunsetted at 18 months, and it's dedicated to helping us resolve an issue of very serious national purpose. We began on this issue, I began on this issue before I came to the Senate, the issue of the imbalance in our criminal justice system and the need to bring a comprehensive resolution in terms of how we handle crime and reentry in this country. We had 2.5 years of hearings, more than 2.5 years of hearings here since I came to the Senate. And after I introduced this legislation, we met on our staff level, since I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, with representatives from more than 100 different organizations across the country and across the philosophical spectrum. This chart is an indicator of the type of support that we have received for this commission. I won't read the names, and I don't expect anyone on the TV screen to be able to read all the names, but this is an unusual circumstance, Mr. President, when you have organizations as philosophically diverse as the ACLU, the NAACP Sentencing Project, National Organization for Victim Assistance, ABA Criminal Justice System, National Center for Victims of Crime, along with the Fraternal Order of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police, all agreeing that we need to step forward and examine our criminal justice system in a comprehensive way from point of apprehension to point of return so that we make better use of our assets and we make better use of our own people, quite frankly. Today, Mr. President, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the Western world, in any known country in the world. We have 2.3 million people in our prisons and jails, and another 5 million people on probation or in some way under correctional management, post-correctional management. Hundreds of thousands of people are being released from jails and prisons every year who are reentering society, and at this point, without a comprehensive structure that will allow those who wish to become productive citizens again the opportunity to have the right kind of transition. And at the same time, we've got 7 million people under some form of correctional supervision or in prison. We don't feel any safer. This is the other beam that our analysis has written as we've looked at this. Even today, if you ask Americans, 2/3 of the people in this country believe that crime is more prevalent today than it was a year ago. So we tasked ourselves with looking at this problem, trying to figure out how we can do a better job of addressing the issue of criminal justice, spending less money. We're now in a situation where state and local budgets have been stretched to the breaking point. Professor Bruce Western of Harvard estimates that annual correctional spending right now is about $70 billion, with state spending on corrections increasing 40% over the last 20 years. We're witnessing a war on our border with respect to gang warfare. Since President Calderon launched an offensive against drug gangs and cartels in 2006, tens of thousands of people have died in drug trafficking violence along the border. It's estimated that these cartels are now operating in more than 230 cities and towns in the United States. These entities need to be examined in the context of transnational gang activity as they relate to our criminal justice system. We're also largely housing our nation's mentally ill in our prison system. The number of mentally ill in prison right now is nearly 5 times the number of mentally ill in inpatient mental hospitals. Noted experts have cited jails and prisons as the #1 holding facility for the mentally ill. So the conclusion that we reached after listening to dozens of representatives from different organizations across the philosophical spectrum was that we need to have a long overdue, top to bottom, beginning to end examination of how the criminal justice system works in the United States. From point of apprehension to the decision whether to arrest, and if so, what sort of court does a person go into, how long should that person be in prison, what should prison administration look like, how can that be better adapted, and what models do we have out there that can be applied, what should reentry programs look like, how do we deal with this ever-increasing problem of transnational gangs. All of those pieces together. The last review that was undertaken of this nature was done in 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson. So I introduced the National Criminal Justice Act, the goal of which is to create a blue ribbon national commission, time sunsetted, 18 months, get the finest minds in the country together to examine these different pieces and to come back to the Congress with specific recommendations for reforming our national criminal justice system. Just last week, Mr. President, the meeting with Senate Law Enforcement Caucus, Philadelphia Police Chief Charles Ramsey noted the tremendous influence of this last commission's report, which was issued in 1967, 44 years ago, and voiced strong support for the creation of a new commission. We are long overdue to look at what works and what doesn't in our criminal justice system. And this bill has, quite frankly, struck a nerve across the country. I've heard from citizens across all 50 states in support of this initiative. And as I mentioned in the list of supporting organizations, from judges, lawyers, police, public health officials, educators, academics, prisoners, civil rights organizations, and people who are simply concerned about making our criminal justice system better, more fair, and more accountable to the true criminal population, to solving the issues of the true criminal population in the United States. So, Mr. President, I would express my appreciation to Majority Leader Reid for working with the managers of this bill and bringing this legislation, this amendment to the pending legislation, and I trust that it will be a non-controversial, $5 million paid-for study that will, in the end, help us resolve the many fallacies that now pervade our criminal justice system. I thank the Chair and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I'm here today to clear up a lot of misunderstandings that are floating around the country concerning the decision to have some of our troops, not combat, but some of our troops go into sections of Eastern and Central Africa to cooperate with about 5 countries who have been trying for 25 years to eradicate, to get rid of a particular person whose name is Joseph Kony. It's disturbed me quite a bit over the years that not many people really care about Africa. I can remember back when President Clinton was in office, and at that time I objected to sending troops into Bosnia and Kosovo because he was using as a reason to do that ethnic cleansing. And I said here in this desk on the floor, I said at that time, why is he concerned about ethnic cleansing in Bosnia when in any one given day, in any one country at that time, it was mostly in West Africa, and I use Sierra Leone as an example, in any one day there are 100 people being ethnically cleansed in Africa that are cleansed in the same day in Bosnia or in Kosovo, but nobody cared. Fortunately, that changed when 9/11 came, and people realized that there is a serious problem. When our country was attacked, it became evident that with a war on the terrorists in the Middle East, that many of them would be going down through Djibouti, through the Horn of Africa. And so wisely, we decided, and it was mostly the decision by the Senate Armed Services Committee, of which I serve, that we would assist Africa in developing 5 African brigades located north, south, east, west, and central. And that's been undergoing, not to the as rapid as I wish it were, but nonetheless that's happening. And the recognition there is that as terrorism goes down through Africa, that if they are prepared, and I'm talking about the Africans, prepared to handle that terrorism and to stop that terrorism as it comes in, then we won't have to be sending our troops in. Well, that's essentially what happened last week when the President decided to send these troops into the north central part of Africa to address the problem with the Lord's Resistance Army or the LRA or Joseph Kony. It was kind of interesting. Rush Limbaugh yesterday talked about something. He brought it to my attention that even though I disagreed, I don't disagree with him as often as some on the other side do, but he made the statement. Now, up until today, I'm quoting now, up until today, most Americans have never heard of the combat Lord's Resistance Army. And here we are at war with them. Well, that's not true. Have you ever heard of them? He talked about the 3 people who are always in his studio, Don and Brian and Snerdley. Have you ever heard of the Lord's Resistance Army, Don? No. How about you, Brian? No. Snerdley, have you? No. No one's ever heard of you. Never heard of the Lord's Resistance Army. That proves my contention. Most Americans have never heard of it. And here we are at war with them. Let me clarify that in a minute. I'm going to talk about what their mission is there. We're not at war with them. And we're not, in fact, we are specifically precluding our troops from any kind of combat in that area. But I'd like to just kind of put it in proper context as to the significance of this. I've had an opportunity to spend a lot of time in Africa, more than any other member of this United States Senate or any other member of any other senator even before that. I've had many conversations over the last 15 years with President Museveni of Uganda and his First Lady, Janet, about the problem, because it all started in northern Uganda. And what happened was that Joseph Kony, a spiritual leader, has gone in and started building, you can call them a number of different things, the Children's Army or the Invisible Children, but to go in and build this massive army of young people. I'm talking about kids, the ages from 12, 13, and 14 years old, young kids, to go out and abduct them from villages. Then they come in, they teach them with how to operate AK-47s, how to join this army that he's put together. And if they don't do it, or if they fail in their training, then they are mutilated by, let's use the second one there, not that one, this one. Here are these young kids. This kind of gives you an idea how young they are, 11, 12, 13 years old, with AK-47s. That's what his army looks like. See that little kid there? He's 11 years old. This one down here is 12 years old. And they are carrying the heavy weapons. Now, for the ones who don't do what he is saying, they mutilate them. Show this one. And they do it by cutting off their noses, cutting off their ears, cutting off their lips. That's a big thing that they do. Cutting off their hands. See this one right here. His name, by the way, John Ochola, is one that we have seen. They've taken his ears off, his nose off, cut off both of his hands. This one up here, this is another one down here. This is a young child. His lips cut off and his nose cut off, his ears cut off. You can see that. That one, it just happened. They just bandaged him up. I guess what I'm saying is, they are required, once they are in this army, to go back to their villages and to murder their siblings, to murder their parents, and if they don't do it, this is the price that they pay. Now put the second one, yeah, take that down and put the second one back up. So anyway, with the decision that we made to go and help them, and we also have a program that's called Train and Equip, which I'll talk about in a minute. But to go in and actually be of assistance to these countries, in this case, taking out this particular maniac who's been there for 25 years. It's not just in Uganda. Now, I went up to Gulu. Gulu, G-U-L-U. Gulu is in the northern part of Uganda. Senator Mike Enzi was with me at this time, and we went up and we looked at it. We saw a lot of these kids that came back and had been mutilated, and went down and talked to President Kagame. President Kagame is in Rwanda. Now, you might remember Rwanda in 1994 is where the greatest, the most devastating murder of a genocide in recorded history in Africa took place, killing 800,000 people, using machetes, torturing them to death. And they have the same problem down there. They were approaching there. And then if you go over to DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, that's Joe Kabila. Joe Kabila is one who is very much concerned. Of course, Kinshasa, the capital of DRC, is way over in the western side, and it's several time zones over to the eastern side where Joseph Kony was killing these kids at that time. In fact, there's one city over there, the major city is Goma. We were in Goma just shortly before he escaped and went on up north to the Central African Republic and then back up to South Sudan. I had occasion to be in South Sudan last week. It's a new country. And it's kind of an exciting thing to go into a new country and sit down with their members of parliament. And we talked for a good 2 hours. We had 25 members of the parliament of the brand new country, South Sudan. And they told me their major concern right now is getting this guy, Joseph Kony. He's now been making runs up into South Sudan and getting these people. So this is a major thing that many of these countries have joined in to try to do something about Joseph Kony. Well, anyway, last year, we finally, I got a little bit concerned that nothing was happening. So, and one of the reasons I have to say this, Mr. President, that nothing much was happening was if you take these countries like President Museveni, President Kagame, these presidents came out of the bush. And I think when they feel that they're not able to get one renegade group like this, they feel that it's kind of a blow to their ego. And finally, I was able to get the three of them together. That was Joe Kabila, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and President Museveni of Uganda. And we were able to get them all to agree to do something to eradicate this monster. And so they are now in the position to do that. Last year, I led a bipartisan group of senators to pass into law S-1064. It was called the Lord's Resistance Army Disarmament and Northern Uganda Recovery Act of 2009. We had 64 co-sponsors. This is the largest number of co-sponsors on any kind of a bill affecting Africa in history. And we had these senators co-sponsoring the bill, and they all were very excited about it. Then when we brought this, the law, let me tell you what the law says. It directs the administration to develop a regional strategy to apprehend or remove Joseph Kony, his top LRA commanders, to disarm, demobilize the LRA fighters through political, economics, and military and intelligence assistance, and to protect civilians from further attacks. Now, the law is kind of interesting because it specifically precludes us from entering into any kind of battle. And I think that's the most important thing to talk about today, because almost everyone who's reporting on this, including my good friend Rush Limbaugh, is talking about our guys are going to go and gals are going to go into combat. No, they're not going to. They are specifically precluded from doing that. So it's not like it is in Libya. It has nothing to do with the War Powers Act, because these are troops that are precluded from being in harm's way. The SASC, Senate Armed Services Committee, passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and we specifically, I know this because this is by language that we put in, prohibits the U.S. military forces from participating in combat operations to apprehend or remove Kony and the LRA. This is my language that I put in the bill. So not only are they not going to be in combat, but they are precluded from being in combat. So that's what we have right now, and it's before us today. By the way, some people have mistakenly said that this guy's a Christian, and I want to make sure everyone knows that he officially was disavowed by the Catholic Church in Uganda. But I'm going to read this is a Catholic sister, the Comboni Catholic group, who spent 15 years in Gulu. That's the place where I was some 15 years ago. In northern Uganda, has now since then been in South Sudan. I'm going to quote what she said. This is a sister, a Catholic sister. She said, "I was in Gulu, North Uganda, when Joseph Kony took the leadership of this group that became famous for its atrocities. I saw people whose lips, mouth, ears, nose were mercilessly cut without motivation. I still remember the 6 men who came to our premises in Gulu crying, asking for help, as 3 of them had their right hands cut off, as we saw a minute ago. Put back the one that's showing the mutilated ones. Right hand cut off. The other 3 had their right feet cut off by machetes. And it was all done by the LRA. And I'm going on, still quoting this Catholic nun. People cut into pieces with machetes, burnt alive after smearing their bodies with palm oil, small children locked in a hut and set on fire, burned alive, babies pounded in a container used to pound maize, and women and girls raped, killed, abducted as sex slaves. A Congolese lady on Christmas Day of 2008 lost 17 members of her family who had gone to church for prayer. All of them were killed with machetes. I mean, this is brutality that we have never seen anything like before. And I think the other thing that is important to understand is that we have several programs that affect Africa and other places around the world. One is called Train and Equip, or some know it as 1206 or 1208. What we do with Train and Equip is send people in to teach them how to train people, in this case, Africa. We have over 1,000 U.S. forces right now doing essentially what these 100 that the President sent over are there to do. Our military-to-military programs include counterterrorism, border security, maritime surveillance, and all of this, but not combat. And so, as I say, they are, number one, the thing to remember is we are already doing this. What we're doing with the 100 people that are sent over to Africa, we have 1,000 there already doing this. And then, secondly, it's something that is very significant in our fight against terrorism in that area. We're not going to have any of our troops in combat, but this type of thing right here, to see this guy here with his nose cut off, his ears cut off, his hands cut off, all of this. This is going on today, right now, this moment, as we're speaking. So I stand behind the President in his decision. I don't very often stand behind this President, but I do in this case, because we passed it without a dissenting vote. Every member in here, there's not one voted against it. So let's keep that in mind, that's the truth about what is happening now with the LRA. With that, I yield the floor.
The time for morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Mr. President? Mr. President?
If I might, Mr. Leader, under the previous order, the Senate will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 2112, which the clerk will now report.
Calendar number 155, H.R. 2112, an act making appropriations for agriculture, rural development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies, and so forth, and for other purposes.
Mr. President?
Majority Leader.
Senator Cole will be here momentarily, but until the managers of the bill are ready to proceed, I would, on behalf of Senator Webb, call up his amendment, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, for Mr. Webb, proposes an amendment numbered 750. At the appropriate place.
Mr. President, I would ask for the reading of the amendment be waived.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
notwithstanding the previous action just taken, I ask the substitute be called up.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, for Mr. Inouye, proposes an amendment numbered 738.
Ask for the reading of the amendment be waived.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, I'm pleased today to introduce the 2012 Agriculture Appropriations Bill. This is a very austere measure. Almost every category of funding is lower than last year and much lower than the year before. Setting aside disaster and security items that we dealt with in debt limit negotiations, discretionary spending in this bill is $200 million below 2011. And compared to 2010, it is $3.2 billion lower. That is equal to a 15% reduction compared to 2010. In total, discretionary spending is $20.046 billion. That figure includes nearly $300 million in disaster relief for hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, and other natural disasters. Altogether, discretionary spending is nearly $2 billion below the President's request and is consistent with our 302B allocation. To achieve savings and develop a balanced bill, Senator Blunt and I had to set priorities. Among them was a goal to protect public health and safety, including food safety. We made sure these activities are protected. We provided more than $1 billion for the Food Safety and Inspection Service so they can maintain current levels of inspection for meat and poultry. The bill includes almost $2.2 billion for the FDA, which is an increase of $50 million. Most of this increase is for food safety, and FDA is the only agency or office funded by this bill at a higher level than last year. An equally high priority is protecting the most vulnerable Americans from hunger. The WIC program, which historically accounts for more than one-third of all discretionary spending, in this bill is funded at almost $6.6 billion. According to USDA, this level will support current participation levels. We also protected other domestic feeding programs, including the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which is a lifeline for many elderly Americans. We believe it is especially important during these tough times to maintain nutrition program participation, and we have done so in this bill. Another priority worthy of protection is agricultural research. Without continued investment, food production in this country and around the globe will not be able to keep up with challenges posed by growing populations, climate change, invasive pests, and other threats. According to the Economic Research Service, global demand for food will grow 70 to 100% by 2050. To meet that demand, our production capacity will have to increase, and these increases will not happen without sustained emphasis on agricultural research. Senator Blunt and I have worked hard to protect these investments, often at the expense of other USDA programs. One of the most important discussions in Congress today revolves around job creation. This bill includes more than $2 billion for rural development loans and grants. These programs help launch and grow small businesses. They help rural communities build water and sewer lines, which of course are essential to economic development. They help improve small-town fire stations and health care clinics. They support rural housing. These projects are important, and Senator Blunt and I have provided funding to help protect and create jobs in rural America. Two of our programs, PL 480 and McGovern-Dole Food for Education program, fall within the security category of discretionary spending and play a very important role in fighting world hunger. Right now, the Horn of Africa is under a state of declared famine, and the lives of millions of men, women, and children are at grave risk. Food aid is all that stands between life and death for these people, and I'm glad to report that we're able to provide a slight increase in PL 480 above last year. However, we must closely monitor events in Africa and elsewhere, since the funding level for these programs in this bill remain below the 2010 levels. Mr. President, this bill funds the priorities I've described above, as well as conservation, marketing, trade, and many others important to the American people. In spite of the challenges we faced, I believe Senator Blunt and I have provided the proper balance for the programs in this bill. I want to thank him for his help and his guidance. This was his first year as a ranking member of this subcommittee, and he has been very helpful. As I said at the outset, this bill is very austere. The choices we made were difficult, but I strongly believe they were the correct ones. I urge every senator to support this bill, and I hope we can conclude floor action in a timely manner so we can proceed to conference with the House and send the bill to the President. USDA and FDA are now operating our continuing resolution. We need to provide them final spending levels for this fiscal year just as soon as we can. Mr. President, procedurally, we'll be considering two appropriations bills in addition to agriculture, the Commerce, Justice, Science, and the Transportation HUD bills. Any senator who has amendments to these bills should work with us to assure that the appropriate chairman and ranking member can be on the floor to respond to amendments that fall under their jurisdiction. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent my additional remarks be included in the record as if read.
Without objection.
President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to join Senator Cole in introducing this bill, the fiscal year 2012 Appropriations Bill for Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies. I'm glad we are considering appropriations bills on the floor in a manner that will allow us to fully debate amendments. In addition, Mr. President, to funding the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration, the bill we bring to the floor today also includes the fiscal year 2012 bills introduced by other committees, as Senator Cole's already specified, by the subcommittees on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Transportation and Housing and Urban Development. For now, I'll limit my comments just to the agricultural provisions and, of course, defer to my colleagues, Senator Hutchison and Senator Collins, on the provisions that relate to the other two bills. Activities funded by the agriculture bill touch the lives of every American every day. These activities include agricultural research, conservation activities, housing and business loan programs for rural communities, domestic and international nutrition programs, and food and drug safety. Funding for each of these deserves thorough and thoughtful consideration. Senator Cole and I have made some difficult decisions in drafting this bill. Aside from disaster recovery efforts, the bill is $138 million below last year and represents a responsible approach to funding agricultural priorities as we tighten our belt and live more within our means. While most programs are reduced by 5%, we prioritize those programs that protect the public health and help maintain the strength of our nation's agricultural economy. Agriculture is one of the few sectors of our economy that enjoys a trade surplus, and the overall state of the farm economy is currently strong. With the nation's unemployment rate continuing to hover around 9%, expanding agriculture exports is even more vital, as every $1 billion in exports supports an estimated 8,000 American jobs. That's one reason I was pleased that we were able to pass the free trade agreements with Korea, Panama, and Colombia last week. Expanding access to these markets will create an estimated 20,000 agriculture-related jobs alone. However, expanding access to new markets is only one piece of the puzzle that maintains our agriculture economy. Our agricultural products are the best in the world. Our producers are the best in the world at producing products that are desirable in the global marketplace. This is in part, Mr. President, the result of smart investment in America's agriculture research infrastructure. That's why I'm pleased that this bill places significant emphasis on maintaining research programs at our land-grant university system and funding competitive research programs such as the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. These programs are critical to helping our farmers increase production and will expand our nation's economic growth. Not only does every dollar spent on ag research result in a $20 return to the U.S. economy, research investments also result in a food supply that's safe, abundant, and affordable. I'm also glad that the agriculture bill includes funding to help farmers and communities recover from natural disasters. Missouri has seen unprecedented devastation from both tornadoes and flooding this year. Funding, including this bill for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program and the Emergency Conservation Program, is necessary to help those areas recover and resume their way of life. It's important that we support our farmers as they clear debris, regrade, and rehabilitate their land for the next growing season. I want to thank Senator Cole for the bipartisan working relationship we have on the Agriculture Subcommittee. This is my first bill as a ranking member of the subcommittee, and the chairman's giving me every opportunity to provide input into the bill. You've done a good job of balancing the priorities of the Agriculture Subcommittee this year, and I hope my colleagues join me in supporting the bill that the chairman and I present together today.
Mr. President,